Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to start the series on the Queen's Gambit declined, one of the most popular defenses to pawn to d4 and especially to the Queen's Gambit, which white could play. Now, the Queen's Gambit declined is a classical defense, and it's one of the defenses that have been played since the development of chess, and they are still played today because classical chess just cannot be refuted. And what do I mean by classical defenses? With white's starting move d4, black can obviously choose between several options. The two most popular ones are either d5 or knight f6. Usually d5 leads to classical types of defenses, and knight f6 can lead to modern defenses or hyper-modern defenses. With d5, black is fighting for central space. Black is not allowing white to play a simple c4 or e4, which could be played unopposed after knight f6. After d5, c4 is a move which can be played, but obviously can be taken immediately. It's not that simple. White doesn't have that much space and that many options in the center. And with the Queen's Gambit declined, the move e6, black plays the most solid way, and black chooses the most solid option. He simply supports his d5 pawn, so in case it's taken, black is simply going to recapture. Again, white cannot play e4 immediately or easily, expanding in the center. And as I said, if takes, pawn takes, and still e4 is defended against. So the move e6 is the best move objectively, and the best way to support your d5 pawn, but it comes with a downside. If you're familiar with the Slav or the semi-Slav defense, which starts after the move pawn to c6, you can find a series on both on the channel. This move seemingly serves the same purpose as the move e6, but it also has a downside. Okay, so the downside of the move c6 is that you're not doing much to develop your king side. You're not doing much to castle. Okay, so the move c6 doesn't help develop your bishop, doesn't help open up your bishop, doesn't help you castle, and it also takes away the best square for your b8 knight. The upside of the move c6 is you have supported d5 without having hemmed in your bishop on c8. Now let's look at what happens in the Queen's Gambit declined. In the Queen's Gambit declined, the move e6 is a much better option than c6 visually, because firstly, your f8 bishop is now very active on this diagonal, especially looking at the b4 square, which is a square shared by the Queen's Gambit declined and by the Nimzo Indian and Bogo Indian defenses. So very often this bishop is going to come to b4 with check or pinning the c3 knight. What you're also doing, you are hemming in your c8 bishop. So we have a downside to this. e6 is a better move because A, it helps develop your f8 bishop, helps you castle. B, it doesn't take away a square for your b8 knight on c6, but your c8 bishop is in trouble. And here we come to the main strategic problem of the Queen's Gambit decline for black, the c8 bishop. Very often in most variations, black's strategy is going to have to revolve around liberating this bishop. We are going to see several ways of doing that. It's either going to be by a timely e5 break, or by fianchettoing the bishop to b7 and going for c5. In any case, the bishop is going to have to be developed if black wants to try and equalize or fight for an advantage. Now, we are going to be looking at 11 different variations in the Queen's Gambit declined. You can find them all listed on the right side of the screen. Some of them are more than variations. Some of them I would call individual openings. So for some of them, perhaps for the Tarrasch, perhaps for the Ragozin, it may be more than one video. But I will try to make the theory as concise and as understandable as possible. In any case, it's going to be at least 11 videos, and we are going to be going over every important variation of the QGD. Okay, I'll just give you a brief overview of what each variation is about, so that you know what you can expect. We are going to start with two defenses which are avoiding the main move for black on move 3. What do I mean by that? After d5, c4, e6, knight to c3 is the main move for white, and by far the most popular is knight f6 for black. Firstly, we are going to be looking at the Alatortsev and the Tarrasch. The Alatortsev starts with the move bishop e7, avoiding the move knight to f6. Why is that? Because knight f6, if played, allows this annoying bishop g5 from white, pinning the knight to the queen. So bishop e7 is a flexible move which gives black more options, and it's also on a high level. The Alatortsev, also known as the Tarrasch or the Petrosian variation, is a waiting game. Black usually will delay playing knight f6 until white has played knight f3, and that could lead to very interesting transpositions and mind games over the board. I'm going to do that in the video on the Alatortsev. Now the next way to avoid knight f6 after knight c3 is to play the Tarrasch defense, and that's the move c5. Now the move c5 is very aggressive, the Tarrasch is very aggressive. We are also be going over the Semi-Tarrasch, but that's different, and that's going to be a separate video. Nowadays you can often see Magnus Carlsen playing the Tarrasch, or the Semi-Tarrasch especially. So it's quite a popular defense on all levels. So what happens here? With c5, there's a structural risk involved for black. Black accepts a possibility of having an isolated queen pawn, but in return for that, he gets piece activity and attacking potential. Okay, so in one of the main lines, I'm just going to show you the classical Tarrasch. CD, ED, knight f3, knight c6. You can see that this tension in the center can immediately be resolved by white to his own advantage structurally. So taking, for example, on c5 would result in black having an isolated queen pawn. On the other hand, there's really no way for black to avoid that. So why should white do that? In one of the main lines, c takes d4 is going to be what black should play anyway. So g3, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castles, castles, bishop g5, cd4. And after knight takes d4, you can now see that black is going for active play with his isolated queen pawn. He wants piece activity, he wants attacking pressure, he wants open lines, open files, open ranks, open diagonals, and active pieces. On the other hand, white would ideally wish to trade the pieces off and just win the endgame by exploiting the fact that black has a weak d5 pawn. Okay, so that's the Tarrasch. And as I said, Tarrasch has a lot of subtleties, a lot of variations. We are going to be going over that in one, maybe two videos. Okay, then the exchange variation, which is my personal favorite for now. I've only recently started playing d4. The only time I faced the Queen's Gambit declined, I played the exchange variation and I won, although I messed up a bit. But I still find it very easy for white to play, and the plans are quite fun. Okay, so after knight c3, we now come to knight f6, and the other defenses are all going to have 3 knight f6 for black. So that's the first branching you need to remember. On move 3, black either chooses the Alatortsev, the Tarrasch, or plays knight f6, which leads to everything else. So if you want to play the Queen's Gambit declined with black, perhaps choosing the Tarrasch or the Alatortsev could reduce your opponent's options and ease repertoire creation for you. Okay, the exchange variation, as the name says, you exchange CD, ED. Okay, now, you might be wondering, if one of the main downsides of the move e6 is closing in your c8 bishop, why in the world would white take on d5 so that black can take with the e-pawn and liberate his bishop, while at the same time he did not have to play the move c6, he did not have to take away a square for his knight, from his knight, and his bishop is open? Well, that's a very good point, but in the position with bishop g5, which is the main move, bishop e7, and white playing e3, black playing c6, white playing bishop d3, this is the main line, and this will happen in most games. It's not really clear why this bishop is liberated and what's it doing. It's not really a good piece. If it goes, for example, to g4, oh, I'm sorry, something is going on. I turned on the engine by mistake, sorry. Something like knight g2 e2 or queen to c2 are very good moves, and after I play queen to c2, what's your bishop doing on g4? And it's obvious that white's bishop on d3 is much better than black's bishop on g4, so you're helping liberate the bishop, but it doesn't have a clear purpose. Another thing about the exchange variation, which I'm going to be focusing on for a while, is this Carlsbad pawn structure, which is one of the most important pawn structures in all of chess. which you have to know, and understanding it is going to help you in the Caro-Kann, for example, and in numerous other openings. In the Caro-Kann, black has this pawn structure in reverse in the exchange variation, and we are going to be looking at some of the most thematic plans. One of the most thematic plans is a minority attack for white, which is basically trying to push your b pawn to b5, either forcing black to take c6, b5, or taking on c6, and after b takes c6, ruining black's pawn structure. He would be left with these three pawns, and then the plan is knight a4, knight c5, something like that. And the minority attack starts with preparation, usually rook b1, a3, b4, and etc., etc. So we are going to be looking at that. After the exchange variation, we are going over to the classical defense or the orthodox defense, which is the old way to play, but very solid, no weaknesses, and black's strategic aim will be simply to develop his bishop, and that's going to be the main theme of the games. So e3 castles, knight to f3, knight b to d7. With the classical or orthodox knight b to d7, black is simply supporting his piece. And now, as I said, this piece is a problem. So either e5, which is now supported by the d7 knight, or c5, which is also supported by the d7 knight. We are going to go over themes on how to do that. I personally think this game is easier to play for white, but it's fine for black, perfectly playable. Played very often at high level. Again, Magnus Carlsen, Mamedjarov, Elianov, many top level players. Okay, then next we have the Semi-Tarrasch. As opposed to knight c3, c5, the immediate strike on white center, black starts with the move knight f6, and now after knight f3, we have c5. The difference is that now, after c5, if white chooses to play c takes d5, black is not forced to take with the pawn. In fact, the main line is to take with the knight. Therefore, the inclusion of the move 3 knight f6 is, in my opinion, the improvement on the Tarrasch. So I think the Semi-Tarrasch is quite more comfortable for black. So knight takes d5, e4. This is now a very long forcing line, which I'll just briefly browse through here. We're going to be explaining all of this in detail. So the Semi-Tarrasch is a very interesting option. As I said, again, after knight f6, white of course has the option to do many other things. He doesn't have to go knight to f3. So you are kind of risking not being able to enter the Semi-Tarrasch, but it's still the best move, I think, knight f6. Okay, now the Ragozin. After e6, we have knight c3 again, knight to f6, knight to f3, and now if you don't want to go for the Semi-Tarrasch with c5, you may want to go for the Ragozin, bishop b4. And the Ragozin is a combination of the Queen's Gambit declined and the Nc3 Indian defense. Black pins the c3 knight, same as in the Queen's Indian. The idea of pinning the c3 knight is not only to be ruining the pawn structure after b takes c3, but most importantly to weaken white's influence over the e4 square. In these pawn structures, white ideally wants to push e4, and if e4 is played, white will have liberated his position and simply have an advantage. Something is going on with the pawns. Wait. Whoa. I'm sorry, something's wrong. I don't know what. Hello, can you hear me still? Yeah, I think there was something wrong with my mouse for the moment. It's probably fine now. Okay, so where were we? For some reason my mouse kept clicking. Okay, so if white manages to play e4, then he will be better. Why will he be better? Because all of his pieces will be liberated and he will have a huge center. Okay, so the move bishop b4 is designed to stop e4. In conjunction with the knight on f6, that's a very powerful piece constellation. And what black wants to do to follow up, he wants to play something like c5 to put additional pressure on the center, provoke white to dissolve his center, and then later on a move like queen a5, knight to e4, and you can see that white could be in a lot of pressure. So the Ragozin is very interesting. The Ragozin is very aggressive, especially if you are familiar with the Nc3 Indian or Bogo Indian type setups. It's going to be a very good variation for you to choose. Okay, Next, we come to the aggressive Cambridge Springs. Cambridge Springs is a counter-attack which is, I think, overrated, in my opinion, but it's still a very fun defense to play. So we have knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, knight bd7, knight to f3, c6, e3, and now queen to a5. And the idea of the Cambridge Springs is simply to unpin by counterattacking. It's as simple as that. You want to be able to move your knight, ideally to e4, so you can see that already bishop b4, Ragozin type ideas, and knight e4 could be played because the knight is no longer pinned. The bishop is no longer staring at the queen on d8. So queen a5 is a very tricky move, and if white isn't careful, then of course in a couple of moves black could win the game. That's why we are going to be going over a ton of theory, and I'll show you how to stop that. For example, the main move here is knight to d2, unpin the knight immediately, immediate support over e4, and this move is quite necessary. Okay, after the Cambridge Springs, we are going to be looking at two defenses, starting with h6 on move 6 for black. Knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, castles, knight f3, and h6, chasing the bishop away, bishop h4. And now we're going to be looking at the Lasker and at the Tartakower. The Lasker is the move knight e4, which today is not so popular. It's regarded to be quite a drawish defense, a drawing weapon. Why? Black seeks to trade off the pieces to make his position easier to play, to make the game equal. And of course, white now doesn't have a better option, but bishop e7, queen e7, and already it becomes easier to play for black. The bishops have been traded off. Okay, the second defense we are going to be looking at after bishop h4, h6, bishop h4, is the Tartakower with b6. And if the Ragozin is the combination of the Nimzo and the QGD, then the Tartakower is the combination of the Queen's Indian and the Queen's Gambit declined. By playing b6, black wants to control e4 with his bishop on b7. Now, funnily enough, the bishop can also be developed to e6 in some of the lines and also to a6, but b7 is one of the main ideas, controlling e4. And again, you want knight bd7, c5, full control in the center or fight for the center. And as I said, quite similar to the Queen's Indian defense. So if you've played the Queen's Indian, the Tartakower may be the best variation for you. And now the two sidelines we are going to be going over are in this position after knight f3, the Vienna variation with d takes c4, a variation in which black avoids the isolated queen's pawn possibility which comes from the Tarrasch after the early c5, because he simply gets rid of his pawn. So in a position after e4, of course, which is the most active move, bishop to b4, bishop to g5 and c5, you can see that there's no way for black to have an isolated queen's pawn because he doesn't have a queen's pawn. Okay, so that's the Vienna, very interesting variation. And finally, we are going to be going over the Blackburn variation or the Harwitz attack, knight f3, bishop to e7, bishop f4. And this is quite refreshing, having a bishop on f4 in the Queen's Gambit declined. A very aggressive variation. You have sort of a London system bishop with the pawn on c4 instead of c3, which I personally find very good. You avoid piece trades with bishop f4, that's another thing. Bishop g5, as you could see in the Lasker defense, could often lead to piece trades on e7 or on f6. But with the bishop on f4, piece trades are less likely to happen. So the Harwitz attack or the Blackburn variation is going to be something we finish the series with because it's one of the most aggressive lines. Okay, so 11 variations altogether. We are going to be doing that for about the next 2 weeks, probably 12 or 13 days. And I hope you like the series. Let me know what you think. If you have any variations to add, please comment below. And stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.